In this video, I'm going to do my best to introduce how Greek nouns work. Let's start by talking about the four basic uses that we see in English and the uses that we're also going to see in Greek. So when we're talking about how nouns work in English, we should know something about the subject. Every sentence is going to have a subject. And often in our sentences, there will also be possessive words like his book or her notebook. And these words sometimes are also qualifying words. And then we are going to see indirect objects and direct objects. These are four very common uses of nouns that we see in the English language, and these are also uses that we're going to see in Greek. Let's take a look at an example sentence then in English. Greg gave me his notebook. Well, how do these nouns break down? How are they working in this sentence? Well, we can say that Greg is the subject. This would actually be called the nominative in Greek. The subject is called the nominative. His is a possessive word, which in Greek would be the genitive case. Greg gave me his notebook. So Greg is giving the notebook, but he's giving it to me. Me would be the indirect object in the sentence, which in Greek, generally speaking, is going to be the dative case. And the notebook is the direct object. The direct object, generally in Greek, is going to be called the accusative case. The key to being able to identify how nouns are being used in Greek is going to be the noun endings. In English, it's both the endings or the form of the word and the order of the word in the sentence. For instance, we usually start our sentences with the subject, right? Greek word order works a little differently, and the key to understanding the function is going to be the noun endings. Formation is a big deal for understanding how a word is working in a sentence, right? Because we could say, Greg gave me his notebook. That works, but what doesn't work is to say something like, Greg gave I his notebook. So the pronouns me and I are referring to the same person, but they form differently based on how they're being used in the sentence. And that's because form indicates function. This is true for English and Greek. So let's take a look at a word in Greek in its nominative case. Logos is a word that means word, and it is nominative because it ends in a sigma. And in just a minute, we're going to talk about all the noun endings. But we know that logos would probably be functioning as a nominative or maybe a predicate nominative in a sentence in Greek because of the letter with which it ends. Logon is the same word, but it would be the accusative case because it ends in a nu. Logo would be the dative case because it ends in a iota. And usually for the dative case, at least when it's dealing with a singular noun, the iota is going to subscript. And logu would be the genitive case because it ends in an upsilon. So we want to keep in mind that form indicates function. Here's what the noun endings look like in Greek. Fortunately, there's a lot of overlap between the cases. For instance, we can see that in the dative singular, they're all iota, right? We've got iota, iota, and iota. Same is true for the accusative singular. All of these words are going to end in a nu. This is somewhat true for the nominative plural because if it's a masculine noun, it's going to end in iota, and if it's a feminine noun, it's going to end in iota. Notice what happens in the genitive plural. They all end in own. Own, own, and own. Same is true for the dative plural. So we actually have a lot of overlap for these noun endings. So here's what the endings look like when they're attached to the stem vowel of a given noun. This would be a good place to talk about these numbers up here at the top of the graph. These numbers refer to declension. Declension is simply a term that talks about how words form. Second declension, as you can tell by looking at these different columns here, refer to any noun whose stem vowel is an omicron. And first declension, which deals with feminine nouns, is when the stem vowel ends in an eta or an alpha. If we compare the masculine column with the neuter column, we can see that there's a little bit of overlap in the endings, right? The endings will help us understand the gender, but there's going to be some other features too that will help us. But if you take a look at the genitive case, u and u, same ending, right? The omega with the iota subscript is also going to be the same, and the accusative singular is going to be the same. After that, the genitive plural for the masculine and neuter share the same ending, and the same is true for the dative case. So there's overlap there, and you might say, well, how will I know the difference then between a neuter word and a masculine word? Well, there are other signals. For instance, when we're learning the vocabulary, let's say a word like logos, right? We see it in the vocabulary written as logos. Well, the vocabulary always occurs in the nominative case. And so if in the nominative it ends with a sigma, that tells us that we're dealing with a masculine word, because a neuter word in the nominative case is going to end in a nu. And so when we learn the word that means work, ergon, we notice that, oh, that ends in a nu, so this is a neuter word. So sometimes the form of a word will indicate for us the gender. Other times we'll have to rely on how we memorize the word so we can remember the gender of the word. Sometimes there will be other features like the article might help us identify the gender, or maybe a adjective that's modifying the noun, which has a clearer formation, that might help us identify the gender. But a lot of times it'll come down to how we memorize the word to know the gender. But the first declension nouns, or the feminine nouns, are easy to identify because their stem vowel is going to be an eta or an alpha. So a lot of feminine nouns in the singular have a stem vowel of eta, but when they form in the plural, it shifts to alpha. That takes a little getting used to. And there's other feminine nouns that in the singular are going to have a stem vowel of alpha, and they remain alpha in the plural. This might all sound a little esoteric right now, but the more we see these nouns in action, the easier it's going to be to identify them. So here we see the noun endings as they would be attached to nouns. In the masculine column, we have the word logos. In the feminine column, the word graphe, which has the eta, right? In the singular, see the eta there? But that will shift to alpha in the plural. Something that's happening right here in the genitive plural is that the stem vowel generally gets swallowed up by the long omega. And then hora would be a noun that has alpha in the singular, and of course it would keep alpha in the plural, and it would share the endings that we see right here with graphe. Let's take a moment to think about how these different forms would be translated. For instance, if we just start with logos here, that's in the nominative case, so that would just be translated word. In the genitive singular, genitive is the case of possession or qualification. It's a highly nuanced case, but we can start by saying often it denotes possession. And so if it's logos, which means word, it's in the genitive case, we would say of the word, maybe something that belongs to the word. If it's in the dative case, which we said is the case of the indirect object, it would be to the word or for the word. And for the dative case, we often have to provide a keyword, something like to. Other times it might be for, and a lot of times it's another prepositional idea that is determined by the context. So logo would be to the word or for the word. If it were accusative singular, it'd be functioning as the direct object probably, and so it would just be translated word again. In the plural, logi would be words. Logon, genitive plural, would be of the words. Logis would be to the words or for the words, and logus would be words. And of course, these rules for translation would also be true for the feminine nouns, and they'd be true for the neuter nouns. Something we're going to do in first year Greek is a lot of parsing. Parsing means we break down a word into its various components so we can better understand it and translate it correctly. So how would we parse a word like logo? Well, we would say it's dative because we see the iota, which in this case is subscripted, right? It's singular, it would be masculine, and the nominative form is logos. When we're parsing, we also want to give the translation, and we would say in this case it would be something like to the word or for the word. So what would we do with a word like graphos? Okay, we want to identify the stem of the word, which we should remember that that is the word graphe, which means scripture. But here the stem vowel is alpha, which is a sign of the plural, and the sigma is the accusative ending. And so now we can parse it. We end up with accusative, plural, it's a feminine noun, and the lexical form, which again is the nominative singular form, is graphe. The meaning would be scriptures. So parsing means that we give the case, we give the number, and we give the gender of a given noun or pronoun or adjective, and we also want to get used to giving the lexical form, which means the way the word would appear in a Greek dictionary. And also, don't want to forget, give the translation too. So let's end the video by taking a look at John 3:16. Most of these words we can't recognize yet, but there's a few that we should be able to recognize, and we're going to pick out a couple of words to parse. So I'm going to start by doing interlinear style translation, and then we're going to try to synthesize it so it makes more sense. I'll read it first, and then I'll go word by word. We have houtos gar, igapesen ho theos ton kosmon. Hoste ton huion, ton monogeni edoken. Utos means in this way, or so, we might say. Gar means because, or for. Agapisin means loved. Hotheos is a reference to God. Names in Greek will often have the article, but we do not use the article to translate names, and so the God in English ends up being God. Ton is an article that means the. Kosmon means world. Hoste means that. Ton again is the article which means the. Huion is the word that means son. See the article again. Monogeny means unique or one of a kind. It's often been translated only begotten, but recent studies have shown that unique or one of a kind is really probably a better translation. And edoken is a verb that means gave. So what I'm going to do is give the translation, and then I'm going to go back and give a rationale for why certain words are translated the way they are based on what we've said in this lesson. So let's synthesize it a little bit. We end up with for God so loved, or we could say in this way loved, that would also be appropriate, the world, that he gave his one of a kind son. All right, so what do we notice? Well, we should be able to identify theos right here, right? Theos is the word for God. It ends in a sigma, which tells us that it's the nominative case, so it will be the subject of the sentence. And in our English translation, usually it will appear more towards the beginning of the sentence. And so we begin with our preposition, and then we continue with the subject of the sentence. God so loved the world. Now, did you notice the ending of ton kosmon here? It ends in a nu. This is from the word cosmos, but instead of ending in a sigma, it ends in a nu, which tells us it's the accusative case, and so, sure enough, it's going to appear as the direct object of this first clause. God so loved the world. And then we translated the second part as that he gave his one-of-a-kind son. We won't be able to identify much in this verse, but we should be able to identify ton huion. Just like ton kosmon, we notice that it ends in a nu. That's a sign of the accusative case, and so that's going to be the direct object of our sentence. He gave his son. He gave his one-of-a-kind son. And so it's appearing as a direct object in our translation as well. You might remember that I said that Greek word order is a little different, right, than English word order. In English, generally, our subject, for instance, is going to appear towards the beginning of a sentence, whereas, look what happened in Greek, it's kind of towards the end of the clause right there, right? Ho theos. There's been a lot of debate about the significance of Greek word order, but it seems to be that the word order is used for emphasis. When we take a look at what's being emphasized in John 3:16, we can notice that the verb, which means love, is towards the front. And in the second part of the sentence, look at the word that appears towards the front. It's actually the direct object, son. And if there's any lesson from the word order of Greek for John 3:16, it's this, that God's love is best seen in the person of his son. Thanks for joining me in this video. I'm already looking forward to exploring some more of these Greek concepts with you in the future, which help us better understand the Word of God.